The hospital smelled the way hospitals always do. Antiseptic and quiet desperation, with something underneath that no amount of cleaning could get rid of. I'd worked the night shift in the ER for 3 years, and I still hadn't figured out what that smell was. Loss, maybe, or the particular stillness of people waiting to find out if their life was about to change. It was a Tuesday in November when they brought him in. I almost missed it. I was finishing up notes on a chest pain case in curtain 4 when the paramedics came through the bay doors, and I only looked up because one of them was shouting. They were all shouting, actually, but one voice cut through the rest. GSW to the left shoulder, BP dropping, he's been out for at least 10 minutes. And I was already moving before I'd made the decision to move. He was big. That was the first thing I registered. Big and pale, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, and a dress shirt that had been cut open to reveal a chest that someone had clearly tried very hard to put a bullet through. The paramedics had packed the wound, but it was still seeping, that slow dark red that means you're running out of time. Dr. Chen took lead. I was on his left side, monitoring vitals, and I had one job and I was doing it. Except that somewhere in the organized chaos of Trauma Bay 1, I noticed something that made my hand pause over the IV line. His eyes were open. Not open the way unconscious patients sometimes have their eyes half open. Open and watching the ceiling, then the monitors, then, slowly, like it cost him something, me. I leaned in, because that's what you do when a patient is conscious and you need to assess, I said quietly, so only he could hear. Sir, can you hear me? You're in the ER. You were shot. We're taking care of you. His lips moved. I had to get closer. Don't. His voice was barely there, just breath shaped into sound. Don't say my name. I hadn't said his name. I didn't know his name. He had come in as a John Doe. No wallet, no ID, nothing in his pockets but a set of car keys and a folded piece of paper that the paramedics had bagged with his belongings. I looked at him for a second. Then I said, okay. He closed his eyes. His name wasn't in any system. That happened sometimes. People without insurance. People who'd crossed a state line. People who were hiding. The paper in his pocket had an address on it, nothing else, and the car keys were to a make and model that cost more than I made in 2 years. Dr. Chen ordered imaging. We stabilized him. And by 4 a.m. he was out of immediate danger and in a rooms upstairs. I went back to my shift. I told myself I wasn't thinking about him. I was absolutely thinking about him. There's a particular kind of person that walks into an ER, or gets carried into one, and you can read their whole life in about 45 seconds. I'd gotten good at it. The man in room 214 had hands that were soft in some places and rough in others. He had a scar along his jaw that wasn't from any accident. He wore a watch that had been removed for surgery, but I'd seen it for a moment. The kind that doesn't have a price tag because people who can afford it don't need to know the price. And he'd been shot probably more than once in his life based on the way the trauma team noted older scarring. And his first instinct when he opened his eyes in a hospital wasn't panic or confusion. It was to control what information left the room. I'd seen that kind of calm before, only once, and it had been a federal agent who'd come in with a knife wound and spent the whole time on a coded call to someone I wasn't supposed to know about. This man wasn't federal anything. I didn't know what he was. I finished my shift at 7, changed out of my scrubs, and walked to my car in the November dark, telling myself to go home. I went to room 214 instead. He was awake. Of course he was awake. He was lying completely still in the bed, which is not how most people lie in hospital beds. Most people shift and adjust and reach for the remote. He was just still, watching the door, and when I came in, he tracked me the same way he'd tracked me in the trauma bay. Assessing, categorizing. You were my nurse, he said. His voice was better now, clearer, though still rough. I was. I stood at the foot of the bed. I wanted to check on you, officially. Is that the only reason? I could have lied, it probably would have been smarter. Instead I said, no. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Close the door. I did. His name was Dorian. He didn't give me a last name and I didn't ask. He told me, in a way that was very calm and very matter-of-fact, that there were people who were going to come looking for him, and that if anyone asked, I had not seen him conscious. He told me this the way someone tells you it's going to rain. Not a threat, not a request, just information delivered with the confidence of a man who was used to being listened to. "Why would I do that?" I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "You already closed the door." He had me there. I'm not going to pretend I understood what I was doing. "I'm a nurse. I have a student loan I'll be paying off until I'm 50. A studio apartment in Queens, and a cat named after a jazz musician. I live a very normal, very small life, and I had always been fine with that. More than fine. Safe felt good. Safe felt earned. But I went back to his room that afternoon on my break, and the next morning before my shift, and the evening after that. It wasn't romantic, not at first. It was more like he was a puzzle I couldn't put down. He never complained about the pain, which should have been impossible given what they'd done to repair the damage. He read when I brought him books from the hospital cart, and he had opinions about what he read that were sharp and sometimes funny and always surprising. He asked me questions about my work, not the polite kind, but the real kind, the kind that meant he was actually listening to the answers. On the 4th day, he asked me my name. I realized I hadn't told him. "Sloan," I said. He said it back to me once, quietly, like he was filing it somewhere. On the 5th day, 2 men in expensive coats came to the nurse's station asking about a John Doe who'd been admitted Tuesday night. I was at the desk. I felt something go cold in my chest. "We haven't had any John Does this week," I said. It came out steady. I was surprised. They looked at me long enough to make the look mean something. Then they left. I went straight to his room. "There were 2 men," I said, and then stopped because he was already sitting up, already reading it in my face. "Describe them." I did. He closed his eyes for a second, and in that second something moved across his face that I hadn't seen before. Not fear. Something older than fear. "Sloan." He opened his eyes. "You should stay away from me. I know. I'm not a good situation for you to be in. I know that too." He looked at me. I looked back. Outside in the hallway, someone was paging a doctor, the PA system crackling, and the fluorescent lights were doing what fluorescent lights do. It wasn't a glamorous moment. It wasn't the kind of moment that looks like anything from the outside. "What do you want?" he asked me. The question caught me off guard. Not because it was hard, but because no one in a very long time had asked it that plainly. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "What do you want?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. "I want to know how you knew," he said finally. "In the trauma bay. You were the only one who noticed I was conscious." "You were watching the room instead of the ceiling," I said. "Unconscious people don't do that." He looked at me like I'd said something significant, like I'd passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. He left on a Thursday, before I got in. He was just gone. Bed stripped, room empty, the books I'd brought stacked neatly on the bedside table, with a piece of paper tucked underneath. The paper had a phone number on it. Nothing else. I stood in that empty room for longer than I should have. Then I took the paper, put it in my pocket, and went to work. I didn't call for 6 days. I kept the paper in my scrubs pocket and went about my life and told myself I wasn't going to call. I went to my regular grocery store and made my regular dinners and watched my regular shows, and none of it felt regular at all because I kept thinking about a man who'd been shot and watched the ceiling, like he was cataloging information, even when he was barely alive. On the 6th day I called. He answered on the 2nd ring. No greeting, just, "I wondered. I almost didn't," I said. "But you did." "But I did." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, somehow. Are you free Sunday?" he asked. The place he took me to was a restaurant that didn't have a sign outside. You had to know it was there, or know someone who knew. The kind of place where the host recognizes you by name, and the menu changes based on what they feel like cooking. It was the farthest thing from my usual life, and I sat across from Dorian. The first time I'd seen him upright, in real clothes, looking like himself. And I understood something I'd only suspected before. He was someone who moved through the world in a very particular way. Quietly. Deliberately. Every seat he chose was with his back to the wall. Every pause in conversation was him scanning the room, automatically. The way I automatically checked breathing rates when I passed someone on the street. He told me, over dinner, that he ran a company. He said the word company, the way people say property, when they mean something bigger. I didn't ask what kind. I could see from how the other diners, 3 tables of them, kept not looking at him that he was the kind of man rooms as adjusted themselves around. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. Straight out between the appetizer and the main course. "No," I said. "Should I be?" "Most people are. I've worked trauma nights for 3 years," I said. "I've held someone's hand while they died and turned around and laughed at a stupid joke from a resident 20 minutes later, because that's the only way to keep going. I don't think you're the most frightening thing I've encountered." He looked at me across the table for a moment. "What is?" he asked. "The most frightening thing?" "Paperwork," I said. He laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised, and it changed his face completely. I found myself thinking I would say almost anything to make that happen again. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't simple. I want to be clear about that, because there's a version of this story where a regular woman meets a dangerous man and everything becomes a movie. It wasn't like that. It was slow and uncertain, and full of evenings where I sat on my couch, wondering what exactly I thought I was doing. He called, not always at convenient times, but always when he said he would. He showed up at a diner near my apartment one Saturday morning because he happened to be in the neighborhood. Or said he was. And we sat in a booth for 2 hours drinking bad coffee. He told me about a city in Italy where he'd spent a summer when he was young, before things got complicated. He didn't say how they got complicated, and I didn't press. I told him about growing up in Ohio, about my mother who still didn't entirely understand what an ER nurse did, but was very proud anyway, about the way I'd decided on nursing at 16 after watching a paramedic save a man's life in a parking lot like it was the most natural thing in the world. "That's why you do it," he said. "Part of it. What's the other part?" "I like knowing what to do," I said. "When everything's falling apart, I know what to do." He looked at me quietly. "So do I." We were different and the same in a way I hadn't expected. The trouble started in January. I was leaving the hospital at the end of a 12-hour shift, keys in hand, head absolutely empty, and a man stepped out from between 2 parked cars and said my name. Not "hey" or "excuse me." My name. Like he'd known exactly who I was and had been waiting. He was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that is a different thing from friendliness. He said, "You know a man named Dorian." "I know a lot of people," I said. "I'm a nurse, not like this one." I looked at him. Steady hands, I told myself. Steady voice. I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He kept smiling. He said something about how I should think carefully about the company I kept, and how some situations had a way of becoming complicated for everyone involved. And then he walked away, and I stood in the parking structure alone, with my heart going at about twice its normal rate. I called Dorian. He answered immediately, which was unusual. I told him, quickly and clearly, what had happened. The way I'd describe a patient's symptoms, that same organized instinct to get the facts out in order. He was quiet for the duration of it. Then he said, "Go back inside. Don't go to your apartment tonight. I'll call you in 10 minutes. He called in 8. He'd already arranged everything. A car, a place for me to stay, people he trusted watching the hospital entrance. I don't know how he'd done it that fast, and I didn't ask. I did what he said. Not because I was helpless or scared into obedience, but because I'd worked emergency medicine long enough to know when someone else had the expertise, and when your job was to let them use it. "I should have told you sooner," he said, when we were finally face to face. Safe house is what he called it, though it looked like a very nice apartment in Midtown with good coffee, and someone who appeared at the door with dinner like it was a hotel. Told me what specifically? That there are people who look for my... He paused, finding a word, vulnerability. "And I'm one," I said. He looked at me directly. "You became one. That wasn't my intention." "What was your intention?" He was quiet for a moment. He had a way of going still when a question mattered, like he was taking it seriously instead of reaching for the fastest answer. I'd come to recognize it as a kind of honesty. "I don't know," he said. "I don't make a habit of..." Another pause. "People are usually safer not knowing me." "Noted," I said. "But here we are. Here we are." We were sitting across a kitchen island from each other, and outside the window, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan does at night. All that light that never quite turns off. I said, "Are you going to tell me what you actually do?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I run things, businesses, some legal, some less so." "How less so?" Enough less so that someone decided shooting me was easier than a lawsuit. I thought about this. Are you going to fix it? The someone. Yes. Are you going to tell me how? No. I nodded. I thought about pushing. I thought about the version of this where I demanded transparency. Demanded he become something more legible to the life I'd planned for myself. And I thought about the top comment I'd have written if this were a story someone else was telling. Finally, a woman who doesn't try to change him. Okay, I said. He blinked, just once, like the word surprised him. That's it? He said. You're not asking me to do anything illegal. You're keeping me safe. You know what you're doing. I shrugged. I know what I'm doing too, when it matters. We don't have to be the same. He looked at me like I was something he was still figuring out the name for. It took 2 more weeks for whatever he was untangling to come untangled. I know this because he told me, piece by piece, not the details but the shape of it. The way a patient's family doesn't need to know the pharmacology, just that the infection is clearing. Someone in his organization had been selling information to a rival. The man in the parking lot worked for that rival. It had been arranged, quietly and completely, and those arrangements were now being reversed in ways I chose not to ask about. I stayed in the Midtown apartment for 4 days. I worked from there. Nurses are allowed to pick up shifts at affiliated hospitals, and there was one 11 blocks away where they needed people. Life kept going, the way life does, because it doesn't stop for drama no matter how dramatic the drama is. He came by every evening. We ordered takeout and watched bad television, and one night fell asleep on the couch, and I woke up with his arm around me and a crime procedural playing on mute and the cat, whom he'd arranged to have retrieved from my apartment, because of course he had, sleeping on his feet like she'd been doing it her whole life. That was the moment, if I had to name one. Not any of the bigger things. By February, I was back in my apartment and back to my shift rotation, and one afternoon he met me outside the hospital with coffee, 2 cups, just standing there on the sidewalk in a coat that cost more than my rent like it was a perfectly ordinary thing to do. I took my coffee. We walked, he said. The situation is resolved. I know, I said. You told me last week. I meant. He stopped. Tried again. I meant that you don't need to. You have options now, if you wanted to. Dorian. I stopped walking. He stopped too, turning to look at me. Are you trying to give me an out? He looked uncomfortable, which was new. I'm trying to be honest with you. About what? About what this is, what I am. He held my gaze. I'm not going to be different. I can't change what I do or what it means. I can protect you. I can be. I want to be present, in whatever way that means to you. But I'm never going to be safe in the way that you probably deserve. The February air was cold enough that my breath was visible, and the coffee was warming my hands through the cup, and there were 100 people moving past us on the sidewalk not paying attention to anything. My job isn't safe, I said. I put my hands inside people's bodies. I make decisions in 30 seconds that affect whether someone goes home to their family. Safe is a thing people tell you you're supposed to want. He looked at me. I want you, I said, which is different. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're not afraid of very much, are you? I told you, paperwork. That surprised laugh again, real and sudden. I stepped closer, because I wanted to be closer. And when he put his arm around me, it wasn't careful or tentative. It was the way he did everything, fully and deliberately, like a decision made. We walked for a long time. Long enough that the coffee went cold, and the city shifted from afternoon into evening, that particular New York blue hour, when everything looks like a photograph of itself. I didn't need him to be anything other than what he was. I didn't need to understand all of it, or approve of all of it, or fix any of it. What I needed was what I'd always needed, the thing I'd said to him in that hospital room, without quite knowing I was saying it. To know what to do. When everything's complicated and uncertain, and nothing goes the way the plan says it will. To have someone beside me who also, in his own way, knows what to do. I found that in the last place I would have looked. In a trauma bay on a Tuesday in November, when a man who should have been unconscious opened his eyes and watched the room instead of the ceiling. And I noticed because that's what I do. I notice things. Turns out that changes everything.